It's finally December, and with the end of the year and its holidays approaching, it's time to cherish the warmth of family and our loved ones. Who am I kidding? It's time to become financially irresponsible and indulge ourselves in blind consumerism. Let's give it up for capitalism, boys. Okay, I know Steam just had its autumn sale ended, but I didn't think it was worth making a video since the winter sales are always better and last longer. Instead, today I will be giving you a handful of visual novels recommendations for a sale that's going on at a completely different storefront. Fanza Games, also known as DMM. I might make a video regarding the Steam winter sale if I have the time, but for the time being, let's just take a look at some discounted Japanese VNs, which now might be the best time to do so, considering how cheap the yen is. That being said, there's a not-so-small possibility that Fanza has your entire country's IP blocked. I honestly have no idea which ones can access it and which can't. While I haven't tried it myself, maybe you can access it using a VPN. But if that doesn't work or isn't an option, I guess you can take this video as simply a handful of visual novel recommendations to get them on DL's site or somewhere else. The reason why I want to highlight this sale is because, while really good, it can be kind of annoying to navigate and find good deals. For this video, I will mainly focus on their 500 yen visual novels and the massive bundles they offer. Before we start though, if you have never bought anything on Fanza, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind regarding its modus operandi. The first thing you need to be aware of is that, while not all of them, most visual novels sold on Fanza have some sort of DRM. The most common one you will see is soft denshi, which while not ideal is at least functional and will only ask you to validate your game on your first launch. As far as I know, after that, you will be able to play it even offline. There's, however, two more types of DRM you might encounter, the first one being Buddy. I'm going to be honest, this one sucks and is far worse than soft denshi, since it will need to connect to the Buddy server every time you launch the game. Again, it does technically work, but it's far more cumbersome than soft denshi. The third type of DRM is probably the worst, which is the DMM game player. This is basically DMM's version of Steam, but 1,000 times worse. I would honestly recommend you avoid buying any game that uses this DRM. Fortunately, they all have a tag that will warn you, so they are easy to spot. Next is the paying method. If you aren't from Japan, which I'm guessing most of you aren't, you will probably need to use DMM points. You can either get the exact sum you need via PayPal, but there's also the option of buying DMM point codes on places like PlayAsia. This latter option will be more expensive, but it's there for those who prefer it. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start with the 500 yen visual novels. To be honest, the majority of the stuff on offer is pretty weak, but there are some gems here and there. Let's start with what I consider to be the strongest title of them. This one I found to be really neat. It's a mystery visual novel where the protagonist and the rest of the cast are playing a life-or-death game of Sugoroku, the traditional Japanese board game. Except in this game, the group has been teleported into a life-sized version of the board itself, based on the streets of Kyoto. I thought the story made good use of its premise, with some really interesting narrative ideas. Give it a shot if you are into Battle of Wits types of VNs. Inclusion is a well-paced, well-presented murder mystery visual novel. It's one of those titles that definitely feels like reading an actual novel, rather than an anime converted into a novel, if that makes any sense. Not that I dislike the latter, but it's refreshing to read something different from time to time. I enjoyed how it presented the story using a multiple perspective approach, giving more depth to the mystery as it progressed. That being said, the game isn't voice acted, and it can be at times visually dull. But the art style was very unique, and it's also not the type of story that overstays its welcome.
Uminomichi.
Before talking about Uminomichi, I should warn you that this game uses Buddy DRM. As I mentioned before, it will work, but it can be a bit tedious to deal with it. Regardless, I quite enjoyed this VN. The story itself isn't revolutionary or anything, but it's a game with a lot of charm in my opinion. The story focuses on a group of friends, but mostly the protagonist's cousin, who recently got sent to live with him and his family in the countryside. The game did a good job at making her character development believable as she slowly opened up to the rest of the group. This is a nice visual novel if you want something that's kind of laid back with a nice rural Japan atmosphere. This is one for the Inaka Core VN fans.
Megureba Meguru Toki.
Besides having a tongue twister for a name, Megureba, Meguru Toki is actually pretty similar to a VN I reviewed in the channel, Moshimo Ashita Gahari Naraba. In this game, the protagonist gains the ability to switch between his physical body and a ghostly form after having a bike accident. The story is essentially split into two, depending on whether you want to follow the living world or the spiritual world girls. If I'm being honest, you can completely skip the former, since they aren't that interesting. The ghostly side of the story, on the other hand, was quite enjoyable. Especially Kumi, who, as far as my unmeasurable knowledge goes, holds the Guinness World Record for longest spoken line of dialogue recorded in a VN.
まずはお互いの気持ちを確認し合ってね。もちろん相思相愛じゃないとダメ。お互いが思い合ってたらね、彼氏と彼女になって一緒に帰るのは当然だよ。結婚で。
Yep, this goes on for a while. I'm just going to put her on the corner so that you get a better idea.
クローバーポイント。
Clover Point is kind of your run-of-the-mill moegea, but it does have a couple of things going for it. First of all, it's DRM free, which is kind of rare in Fanza. And secondly, it's fairly well put together, all things considered. The story mostly centers around the main group of characters trying to put together a stage play. But I also found the portions of the story that took place in the school's dormitory to be pretty comfy. I will also say that the central heroine route was actually fairly good, and I found the money-obsessed girl to be pretty charming. I think I would recommend this one to fans of Emoto-like characters.
空の作り方。
Okay, I'm gonna be real with you. I haven't played this one myself, but I think it looks neat and very stylish. I might eventually cover it on the channel if I get around to it. As far as fantasy-themed visual novels that are on the 500 yen sale, it seems to be the best one. I could be wrong though. If any of you have played it, let me know in the comments. Moving on to the next big part of the sale, which are the bundles. I know that there are plenty of individual discounts, but most of them aren't that interesting on their own. Don't expect massive discounts like the ones Steam, well, used to have. Anyway, as for the bundles, there are different tiers depending on the number of titles you get. Unless you really feel like spending some dough, just go for the 3 or 5 VNs bundle. You can get plenty of mileage out of that. I would also recommend keeping an eye on which developers include their games in the bundle. It's going to make finding interesting stuff much easier. At any rate, I'm just going to give you a handful of VN recommendations that I think are worth considering adding to your picks.
Kusarihime.
The first notable developer that I wanted to highlight was Liar Soft, since most of their stuff, especially their older titles, is included in the bundle list. I could recommend picking up Angel Bullet, as I recently quite enjoyed that one, but if you aren't that familiar with them, just go with Kusarihime Euthanasia. It's probably one of the best horror-themed visual novels out there, as well as one of the most influential works in this medium. Its only caveat is that it's partially voiced, but the atmosphere and the slow build-up in tension and surrealism are truly joyous. It's also worth mentioning that a fan translation of this game is in the works, so you can grab it now cheap if you are planning on playing it when that drops. Besides Kusarihime, the Railsoft games, i.e., the Moreni written visual novels, are also included in the bundle, so grab one if you are brave enough. I recommend either Kaguru or Albatross. Both are great.
炎の腹ませパイドル、マイスター学園 Z。
Depending on your degree of culture, it's possible that you have heard of Milk Factory's Motto Haramas series. Before making those, they operated under the brand name Squeeze, producing essentially the same types of games, but with a bit more focus on story. Just a tiny bit more. I think that, due to their current style of VNs, they have somewhat received the label of being nothing more than a pure Nukige brand, but I think their Squeeze-era titles are far better than people are giving them credit for. Out of all of them, I would recommend Paidol the most. The cast of that game and their interactions can be very fun, with plenty of silly comedy and recurring gags. However, if you are going to get one of their games, be careful with DRM. For instance, Paidol, Wanpaku, and New Dokusei are DRM free, but their other popular titles require you to use DMM game player. Speaking New Dokusei, similar to Kusarihime, it's actually getting a fan translation too, so that might be worth keeping in mind.
変身。パンツになってクンクンペロ
Speaking of silly VNs, another developer similar to Squeeze is Maybe Soft. I've already made a video about one of their games, Yugeki Keiken Pat Vessel, which I found quite enjoyable. However, their most well-known title is probably Henshin 3, which certainly leans more into the Nukige territory. The scenes themselves, however, are hilariously over the top. The premise is that the protagonist gains the ability to transform into any object he wants while also being able to grow whichever part of his body. You can probably see where this is going. It's a very dumb game, but it can get stupidly creative with some of its situations. If you want something a bit more serious and written by one of the best writers of the medium, then consider Itsusora. This one is far more unique than it might appear, although be warned that it can be very hard to piece together the grand narrative. Still, Itsusora is one of Shuman Yu's most emblematic works, which certainly shows in the quality of the writing. It has a very nice atmosphere that's both welcoming as well as a bit mysterious. Definitely consider giving it a go at some point if you want something more complex.
Kanata Made.
I guess I might as well include a couple of titles that I have covered, such Kanata Yori, Kanata Made. This one is a fairly condensed and straightforward Utsuge visual novel, which means that you kind of need to be in the mood for drama to enjoy it. It can get quite heavy at times, but I found the writing to be quite good and compelling. I also wanted to mention this one since I don't think it's usually included in the bundle list, although I could be wrong here. The last individual VN I want to highlight is Tropical Kiss, a favorite of mine. I think it's one of the most pleasant visual novels I've played, both with its story and production values. It's a romantic comedy, but what I liked about it was how openly indulgent it is, with the girls showing constant signs of affection towards the protagonist. I would say Tropical Kiss is a great VN if you want a moage that's a bit less tropey, but just as relaxing. And finally, I want to mention some brands that might be worth looking into. The first one is Black Psych, which some of you might know as the studio responsible for GSS. I can't say I'm that familiar with them, but they have some of their best regarded games available to pick on the bundle, such as Extravaganza, which is apparently an amazing VN if you have the stomach to play it. Purple Software also has some of their older games on it, which, and this is probably just me, I think they look more interesting than their newer stuff. I would also like to recommend some VNs by Elf, like Kawarazakike no Ichizoku 2, but all of them use DMM Game Player, which is a shame. And that's going to be it. I actually wasn't planning on making the video this long, but I guess that's how things turned out. Regarding the bundles, I honestly recommend just scrolling for a while and seeing if anything catches your attention. There's really a lot of stuff in there, so I'm positively sure I missed quite a few great VNs. So just scroll your worries away. Anyway, I know most of you are far more interested in the upcoming Steam Winter Sale, but I also wanted to highlight this sale as well. At the very least, I hope you found the video useful, and as always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Marin out.